Welcome to Insight. Abiodun is my name. Lizzie?
It's nice to be here again, and today's edition promises to be exciting and informative.
What are we expecting from your end?
All right, on the media review segment, we are not done with irresponsible journalism. We all have smartphones, we click shooters, and we record and we share as well. Why? Do you verify? And then, of course, on the segment, we're taking a look at the role of the information bill, freedom of information bill, actually. How will this help control what we send out, what we share, what we give to the people to read, to watch? These are some of the areas we'll be taking a look at on the segment.
When the heads of parastatals in the Ministry of Information and Culture paid a visit to the Minister of Information, Lai Mohammed, he expressed a concern and he said he looks forward to a day where you come out and you see everywhere calm. But what you see now is you watch TV, you listen to radio, you read very shouty headlines, and one would think Nigeria is balkanized.
Of course.
I believe you look at this.
And then some of the headlines are not just shouty, they're disturbing.
Okay.
And most times, the information, the story, not true.
Well, that will be that on media review segment of Insight. On discussion segment on Insight today, we shall be discussing due diligence. Now that the ministers and other heads of the system have assumed office, could we allow them follow due diligence to achieve results? Most times when we get policy relapse, it is because due diligence was not followed. So I have two lawyers who will be looking at that and the need for Nigerians to stay off and allow these public officers function and follow due diligence. On interview segment on Insight today, we shall be looking at conservation and alternative livelihood option. When you say a hunter who has lived all his life a hunter, hunting, I now say don't hunt anymore in the concept of conservation, what is that sustainable alternative livelihood option you give to him? And other aspects within the natural resource that we're talking about, timber, non-timber forest products, and wildlife. The Conservator General of the National Park Service in Nigeria will be my guest on that segment. Is it?
It's going to be very, very interesting. Watch out.
Okay, up next on Insight is the discussion segment, due diligence and governance. There is a word we use commonly up to the marketplace, and you hear somebody say due diligence. But it's a very strong word, meticulous, if you're meticulous about it, but it has really affected us mostly within the public governance domain. Due diligence. Most times you find a policy relapse because there was no due diligence. You find all kinds of situations around the public governance domain, all for the sake that people did not follow due diligence ahead of that policy. And what do you find? Buck passing. So on this segment of Insight today, we shall be looking at due diligence and governance. My guests, Abiodun Aikomo. Abiodun Aikomo is the former Special Assistant to the President on Financial Crimes, but he's a financial crimes expert and lawyer working in the office of the Attorney General and Minister of Justice. Good to have you on Insight.
Thank you, Dean.
Okay. I also have with me here a legal practitioner too, Pius Onigah, constitutional and human rights lawyer with Kanu Agabi and Associates. Good to have you on Insight.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. As common as it sounds, due diligence and governance.
I want to take a very simplistic approach today. I don't want to talk as a lawyer in the strict sense.
But you're a lawyer.
I am, unfortunately. So I want to take a very simplistic approach. Due diligence simply refers to the standard of reasonableness that is expected of a prudent person in handling affairs committed to him or her. Simply put, that is due diligence. In the standard of reasonableness, the standard of care, the standard of being careful that is expected of any prudent person in handling anything committed onto his hands or her hands, due diligence.
Okay. Let me hear your thoughts.
Yes, very well. The definition my colleague has proffered, is not far-fetched. Due diligence, just like he has said, is the reasonable qualification. So in ensuring due diligence, you inadvertently or consciously avert the situation where you're likely to find yourself in committing an offense, a crime, or a tortious liability. So basically, due diligence is employed to ensure that you don't find yourself, guilty of a tortious liability or criminal responsibility.
Now, most often in the public governance domain, I'm happy the two of you are lawyers, you realize that there have been a lot of mistakes. A few things have gone wrong in terms of steps taken by public officials. And I say this because ministers have just taken over the reins in various ministries in the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And we're trying to use as a guide the importance of due diligence. Because most times you hear somebody say, it's too meticulous. Why must we follow it in the public governance? Why must we follow it?
Public governance is all about due diligence. Public governance is about trust reposed in a few class of people to take collective actions on behalf of many others. So it is, like I said, it is a position of trust. You have resources belonging to 180 million people, and you are supposed to carefully manage it so that it will go round, so that it will take care of all the issues, so that it will cater for all the challenges that may arise. So in carrying out such function, it is implicit in persons who find themselves in those capacities to take due care, to be responsible, to follow everything due process, and to ensure that the right things are done at all times. And that, I said initially that I'm going to take a very simplistic view. So, due diligence in this context of public governance is about doing the right things at all times, is about following laid down procedure and following the law, being lawful in all dealings.
Okay. Let me take you differently. Consequences.
Yes, of course.
Very important here,
yes,
before we go to the next leg.
Yes, certainly. For due diligence to be taken seriously, there ought to be corresponding consequences if there are failure or there's failure in compliance. Of course, basically, the laws, there are extant provisions in the country that clearly punishes infringement where necessary. Of course, fundamental among them is the provisions of the Constitution. The Constitution clearly, in Article 5, particularly Part A, Part 1 of Article 5, so 5th schedule to this Constitution, clearly stipulates the code of conduct for public officers. And of course, paragraph 15 down clearly stipulates the provision for the code of conduct tribunal, which of course punishes offending or erring members of this category. So the public officers, of course, which are in charge of the governance of any country or state, have their punishment to include either forfeiture of the proceeds acquired in the course of your stay in the office, if it is established that they were duly, of course, wrongfully acquired. You equally stand to have your office, have yourself suspended from the office for running up to 10 years and the likes. So there are basically consequences. That is, if it is established that the conduct you have been seen to, the way you have been seen to have misconducted yourself is in line with your responsibility, is civil in nature. However, if it is established that it has criminal implication, you can as well be tried in the secular court for criminal charges. You can be duly prosecuted and, of course, sent to prison where the case arises.
Okay. When Mr. President swore in ministers, one statement he made that was misconstrued to the presidency has eventually cleared the air on that. We saw it a lot of persons saw it from the perspective of the need for due diligence. But some persons misunderstood it when he said, for issues like this, pass to the Chief of Staff, for issues like this, pass to the SGF. And also, there's this lingering matter that says Nigeria is to pay a judgment worth to the tune of $9.something billion. Is it billion or billion again?
Billion dollars.
$1 billion, yes.
And the question is, was due diligence followed? So looking at it, I believe we're on the same space now. Public governance, due diligence to avoid wastefulness, illegality, misappropriation of funds. Because if due diligence is followed, then somebody won't be able to steal money from the public treasury. Somebody will not be able to embarrass government, even while in office. That's what I'm sustaining.
The statement of Mr. President.
That has been explained. I'm
Yeah.
only using it as an example.
Okay. Okay. Due diligence or being lawful or adhering to rules and regulations
Mostly by public officers.
by public officers. The motive behind all those rules is to ensure public accountability, to ensure that there is no wastefulness in government, and that things are done properly. So the benefit is for the society to have people who are accountable in government, to avoid waste, and to ensure that things work the normal way that it should go. So we should not even be making noise about it. It is something that should go without saying, that should just be seamless when you find yourself in any organization, unless if it is a barbaric enclave. But any society where human beings live and they want to continue to live, you will find out that there are rules. So it's just about the rules guiding the operation and conduct of a business, of the business of governance, and people adhering to it. So when this is done in the right way, in the way that it is laid down, you find effectiveness, you find efficiency, you find that there is no wastage, you find that things will run normally. What is the difference between our society and the societies that we are aspiring to be like, or where we always want to run to? It is just because people follow due process.
Okay. Could it now be that it is because we have institutional failure?
Yes, of course. I will say yes. In my opinion,
Because he has hit it, you touched it somehow,
Yeah, very
you
well.
touched on code of conduct, he has hit it clearly. Could it be as a result of institutional failure, or maybe a balkanization of the laid down rules by those who should run the institutions?
Yeah, I will say that the system has failed, and the system requires a complete overhaul for us to get it rightly. You see, the issue will start from even where those persons who are supposed to ensure that the right thing is done, most of them are complicit, they compromise. For you to become a public officer, as soon as you come in, you are supposed to comply with the declaration of asset form. And when the man at the Code of Conduct Bureau is unable to enforce it because he has collected money, you will discover that from that point, you will observe a failure. And then when you move from there, even to the next point where if you have failed to comply, and you are brought before the Code of Conduct Tribunal, the man who is at the helm of the affairs at the Code of Conduct Tribunal compromises again and then becomes complicit. You see that the system is completely a failure. And that is why, if you're looking at a solution to this, I will take us back first to the Code of Conduct Bureau, ensure that the staffs there are correctly remunerated, such that if you see somebody coming to give you bribe, you won't even have need to collect it. And then ensure too that there's good policing, internal policing within, so that once you collect money from Mr. A, Mr. B is there to ensure that you are brought to book. And if you're able to address it at that level, you now move to the next stage, which of course the Code of Conduct Tribunal. Ensure that those persons who are brought in to serve there are people of integrity, people who are not ready to compromise. Once you're able to fix it from this angle to the other, you're certain that any public officer will ensure that you comply with these laid down rules. Because once you fail in complying with the laid down rules, the Code of Conduct Bureau will certainly fish you out. And then once you meet the Code of Conduct Tribunal, you'll be adequately, penalized. So I expect that if we require a system, you know, a change in the system, there ought to be a complete overhaul that will touch all quarters so that you know that there won't be any escape route for you. And then that will ensure compliance.
Okay, I'm happy that I have a constitutional lawyer and human rights lawyer, and I have a lawyer and financial crime expert. Government has been constituted. In conclusion now, before we go, ministers, senators, House of Representatives, commissioners, governors, they are all in the public domain functioning. And you have this overwhelming pressure coming on them. What kind of attitude should Nigerians put up towards this one so that they don't deviate and they keep and comply with due diligence?
Well, I don't want to focus narrowly on code of conduct. I don't want to be too lawyerly like my colleague. We should be moving towards ethical reorientation. It's not strictly from the criminal perspective, but from a holistic view of due diligence, of doing things right at all levels, at all strata of government. The government, the president has been elected by popular mandate. The Constitution has given him powers to maintain the Constitution of Nigeria and all laws. The president cannot do it alone. That power that was given to president under Section 5 can be exercised by him through ministers, through even public officers. Now, there is this agency problem, principal agent crisis in governance. So how does the government ensure, or how does the president ensure that as he's committed to the maintenance of the Constitution, every other person involved will do the same thing? They will not serve their own purposes. They will follow due process. We have laws. You know, when there are gaps in the law, the National Assembly will rise to the occasion. Even private people can make noise about it, and we have a new law. But as of today, we have laws taking care of at least almost all the issues that we see in Nigeria, on procurement, on even public service rules, how we engage each other, how we deliver service. So what we should focus is a public, to have a new culture, a culture of responsibility, a culture of patriotism, so that we all do things right. You know, it's not like my learned colleague said, it's not one Leviathan who will come and do it for us, or a Superman. Nobody can do that alone. So the institutions are in place, the rules are there, so we must ensure that every participant, every stakeholder key in to ensuring that due process is followed. You know, most government departments, government offices, is a system. They call it bureaucracy. You pass file, somebody will generate a memo, so another person high up will look at it and say it makes sense. Director, you may want to approve. Director will look at it and say, PAMSEC, I concur. You know, that's the way it works. So if there is weakness somewhere along the value chain, there is going to be a problem. The PAMSEC, for example, does not generate memos. It may not have the time because of the kind of duties that he is involved in. He may not have the time to look at all the documents that are being reviewed. Somebody far junior will do it. So if he recommends something very fantastic because he has been induced one way or the other, and the PAMSEC approves, you know, so that is why everybody along the value chain must key into this due diligence mindset, okay, lawfulness mindset, to ensure that things work.
Okay, let me get Onigah's perspective.
Yes, very
because
well.
I think the message has been driven now.
Yeah, very well. And like my colleague has said, we require an attitudinal change where public servants, people in governance, ought to look inwards. Personally, you look at your excesses as a person and the need for you to first reform and transform yourself. Once you're able to do that, you will ensure equally the transformation of the conclave where you find yourself. And then by extension, those persons you've superintend over, if you ensure that they too have a way of looking at their responsibility in ensuring due diligence. Yeah, due diligence, like I had mentioned earlier, with respect to the provisions of the Code of Conduct for public officers. Basically, all the issues bordering on due diligence are enshrined there. Because if you look at all the paragraphs of the Code of Conduct for public officers, they clearly stipulate.
I had a full program with them.
Yes,
but just for emphasis sake, we're looking at this.
Yes, exactly. So they clearly stipulate, bribery, corruption, and related offenses. In which case, by the time you are able to live above all of that, it is difficult for you to say you're failing your responsibility. It will be difficult for you to be seen to have compromised. It will equally be difficult for you as a public officer or somebody in government to be seen to be failing in your responsibility to live up to expectation.
But it is said that it takes divine intervention for a man, no matter how morally upright he is, to see an inducement and look the other way. What do you say to Nigerians who mount this pressure?
Yes, exactly.
You're a Nigerian, I'm a Nigerian, he's a Nigerian. This pressure, let me imagine, Aikomo is in public office. I have an interest in a particular thing in his office, you have. And we are trying to get at him.
Very well.
It takes two of us to mount pressure and he will succumb.
Exactly.
What can we say to Nigerians to allow these persons alone so that they can function and serve everybody?
Exactly.
That is my drive.
In fact, paragraph 8, particularly of that code, brings to light those persons who induce. The paragraph 6 will talk about those persons who receive. The paragraph 8 will clearly say you should not even give. You should not even influence. So my advice to Nigerians is that these persons who have been saddled with the responsibility of delivering to us democracy dividends should be allowed, to have their conscience guide them. There's no need, for us to think of having them to do things that ordinarily they wouldn't want to do because money has exchanged hand. By the time, of course, on the other hand too, I wish that they should be adequately remunerated. Because if a man is well fed, it will be difficult for you to influence him. But when a man is hungry and he has no hope of even his daily bread, whatever you have for him, the tendency of him, saying no will be there. Very difficult. But if he's well fed and he is certain that upon return home, even from his office, he has his daily bread, he has where to sleep, and he can pick his bills, it will be difficult for you, if the man has conscience, it will be difficult for you to convince him. However, like we all know, some persons are intrinsically bad and incurably bad. But they cannot outweigh the number that are reasonable. That is very infinitesimal out of the reasonable number of people we have. So it is very difficult to say you can completely wipe out this kind of actions within us, but that you can cut down to a reasonable extent if the public servant or the public officers are duly remunerated, and then there's public equally condemnation of this kind of offenses.
Thank you, gentlemen. As much as the time allowed us, I believe we have been able to scratch it. Somebody would have been thinking of maybe deviating on account of being in office. It could be you, it could be him, and I could be the devil's advocate trying to influence you. I may have learned a lot from the two of you. Abiodun Aikomo, just nice to have you on Inside.
Thank you.
And also Pius, Onigah, always a pleasure to have you on Inside.
Thank you for having me, sir.
Can I just...
Okay, just a word.
Closing remarks. Well, it's not conclusive that with the best of pay, people will be clean. But what is clear is that this government is committed to enforcing due diligence, as it were. And that people should note that there will be sanctions for misconduct, all forms of misconduct.
Okay.
So people should bear it in mind at all times.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Up next on Inside is the interview segment. Don't go away.